Going forward, outlook is quite positive. Path, however, is narrow, so a lot depends on what happens in the next few years. In 2025, we project strong growth for Sri Lanka, with a slight tapering off in 2026 and 27. But again, this depends on the implementation of structural reforms and the external environment and how that shapes up. On the current account side, we expect a surplus not just this year, but also moderate surplus.
Start your degree after O-levels. Call IIT on 0766 760 760.
ලේසි ඕනෑම ATM එකට යන්න. රන් කාසිය දිනා ගන්න. ලංකපේ.
Plus in the coming years, driven again by tourism and remittances, even though merchandise exports may be affected by the tariffs. And then finally, on primary surplus, we expect an overperformance this year as well, and perhaps in the coming years, well above the 2.3% of GDP that is projected by the government.
We've grouped it in sort of three key buckets, what we would like to emphasize, and we do emphasize in this report. The first is around enhancing competitiveness and spurring private sector-led growth, and importantly, really trying to open up the economy, so reducing this inward orientation, which was one of the factors that also led to the crisis a few years ago. And this will involve streamlining trade policy. So a key area here is around the para-tariff reforms, really trying to remove and lift these para-tariffs, which are, to some extent, they're moderate sort of revenue generators, but they're hugely distortionary in terms of the market and the export sector. Another area of importance is enhancing customs administration. So this is really the systems, the capacity, the processes to really drive and facilitate trade, and not just be seen as a sort of mechanism or means to generate revenue. And then the second point, just to highlight under that first bucket, is around modernizing this legal, institutional, and regulatory framework. So there was that Economic Transformation Act. There's ongoing work on that. The key part in that legislation was the investment bill, was establishing an economic commission to really position, support, promote, and facilitate investment into Sri Lanka. Here as well, there's the PPP framework, important to finalize that and have in place a much more modernized, progressive PPP framework, as well as looking at the certain areas here where there are caps on foreign direct investment in certain sectors. Those sort of caps need to be revisited and reviewed to understand whether they are potentially a constraint to investment in important sectors. The second bucket is around improving the oversight and management of SOEs. This is critical to enhance competitiveness in key sectors, such as the financial sector, the leisure sector, agriculture, IT, and obviously in service delivery. There certainly is a role there to improve the performance of these institutions, and also potentially look at ways of bringing in private sector participation. And this third point in this bucket is really around the question we ask is what is the policy right now in terms of private participation into state-owned enterprises, particularly in sectors where they're economically and financially viable commercially. What is the plan in terms of trying to bring in more private participation, which is critical for the infusion of new ideas, new technologies, and to support and boost the competitiveness of Sri Lanka. And then finally, bucket here, we're looking at factor markets, particularly the labor market and land. In terms of the labor market, this is a conversation we've had a lot. It's right now there's multiple legislation that goes back even 60, 70 years. That investors and firms have to wade through. And as a result, this means firms and potential hirers of labor are a bit more cautious about taking on labor. And also it has implications, particularly for female labor force participation, which is something we've highlighted and stressed on many occasions, that this is to some extent sort of a low-hanging fruit, easy win in really trying to bring more competitiveness into the labor force. And then finally, this management of state land in particular. Sri Lanka is about sort of 80% owned by the state, but you find that there's these sort of overlapping mandates. There's not necessary coordination. It's unclear sometimes which institutions manage and own what land. This makes it difficult for investors. It affects sort of farmers' agriculture productivity, and also ultimately the sustainable use and management of land, which is something we also emphasize and discuss further in the report.